Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Tip of the Week. So last week we started out talking about templates by talking about master templates, and this week I want to continue that discussion now by talking about action templates. Now when it comes to action templates, what you're going to do in Animate and what you're going to do in Animate Pro will be pretty much the same. So I'm not going to need to go over twice how to create the templates at this point. It's the master template where they really differ, and when it comes to action templates, everything's the same between Animate, Animate Pro, and Harmony. So let's just go ahead and get started. And now, when I take a look at my scene file, I'm just starting out with the same scene that I had left off with last time, and I created my master template here, from last week. So let's just actually, for the sake of the argument, let's just bring in our master template from scratch into my scene, and so you'll see that my master template has the keyframes on it and it has the different poses. So the difference between a master template and an action template is an action template is something where you're going to save some kind of action. For example, it could be an animation, it could be new drawings, it could just be keyframes, it could be all of the above. So first I'll just do a really simple animation to show how we would copy the animation in. And when you're working with a master template that you've just imported into your scene, when you get started, what you want to do is you want to select the pose or the keyframe that's the one that you want to use for this scene, and you just want to drag it over to the first frame, and then you just want to select everything else and hit delete just to delete the exposure and the keyframes on those other layers. So now that I've got that starting pose the way that I want it, I can extend the exposure with F5 for the length of my scene, and now I'm ready to get started animating. And for this character, I'll just do something really simple. I will move his arm up in the air. Maybe I'll flip or rotate his hand a little bit or something like that. And it looks like I've got it set right now to stop motion keyframes, so it's going to jump in between them. You can set it to motion keyframes as well if you want. But what's nice about stop motion keyframes actually is you can put them like right next to each other, and you can put your onion skin on if you want as well. And then you can sort of preview what's going to happen on that frame. So I can see there's the previous drawing for that element, and I can check out exactly where it is. So then if I want to like move the ear on this frame, then I can really get the posing exactly the way that I want it to be. I can go up to the whole head level, maybe move the whole head around. And this character has a bit of a funny neck there, but we'll work around it. So just going to do something kind of simple like that. I don't know what he's doing. He's getting ready to do some kind of aerobic movements here. I'll just rotate his body backwards a little bit. And of course I'm hitting B to go up the chain, so as I go up with B, that's going to allow me to make sure that I get the pose exactly right. It looks like this joint hasn't been set up properly on this character, but that's okay, we'll just pretend it is. So now I've got my two poses looking the way I want them to look, more or less. I might even want to just, like get the foot looking how I want it to look, and kind of, I can rotate now. I can take his entire master peg and rotate him so his foot's on the same spot. So, oops, I should have done that on the first frame. Looks like I'm on the second frame. And I did something odd. Okay, so got those two the way they are, and now what I want to do is I want to get the leg to go underneath his center of gravity. So on that second frame I'm going to move the leg over a little bit, rotate it up, and now I can take that master peg and I can just align the two feet so that, there we go, so now he looks like he's moving backwards, getting ready to do something fancy. Okay, and now that I've got that movement working the way that I like it to, I can collapse everything inside my master peg, and oops, it looks like there's still something left over on that frame. There we go. Okay, so now I can take that keyframe and I can move it over. Let's say I want this to take place over the course of 20 frames, and then I can select the first keyframe and I can turn it into a motion keyframe, just by clicking on that motion button, and now I've got some, movement happening in between those two. And if I want to, I can also set ease on multiple parameters to give a little bit of ease into that. So I can hit apply, and then I can double check what this is going to do. I can put my stop frame, I can just click on the word stop to put the stop frame at frame 20, and then I can play back to see how that's working. So it's a bit of an ease on that now. So if that's working the way I want it to, maybe I just want to give it a bit more of a pop there. Poof. Right. Okay, that's looking better. So if that's working the way that I want it to, and I know that I want to reuse this animation multiple times, I might want to save this animation as an action template. Now, when you're saving an action template, it's different from saving a master template because what you're saving is just the keyframes and the drawings on the right-hand side of the timeline. You're not saving from the left side of the timeline. Now, the important thing to realize, though, when you're doing this is that when you save an action template, it depends on the order of the layers here in your timeline. It's going to look at the order and the structure of the layers in your timeline. And when you drag and drop your action template back in again, it's going to look for the same structure. So if you create an action template and then you go back and you change the structure, let's say by reordering a layer, by creating a new layer, you will no longer be able to drag and drop your action template back in. And let's take a look at that. So first let's create the action template. I can select the keyframes where I'm interested in, and I can just drag and drop them into my library. I get the no entry sign, and I just realized the reason I get the no entry sign is because I've still got my library locked. So let's get the right to modify that library, and now I should be able to drag and drop that in. And it's a good idea to come up with a naming convention here. It's usually you put a couple of letters to indicate the character's name, and it's a good idea to put action and then to describe what the action is. So let's just call this the wind up, because he looks like he's winding up to kick someone. And now I've got that in there. So if I want to just check to see if it's going to work, I can just take the template and I can drag it straight back in again. And you see that it turns yellow, and it indicates that it is going to bring it back in. So there's going to be a little bit of weirdness in between the two because, I didn't set what's happening between those two. I guess I could set a motion keyframe on all of them, and he's going to go back down again. So now he's moving up and down. But you can see that it copied the action back in. The same thing would work if you bring the master template in from scratch. So I'll just bring in my master template from scratch, and now I will do the same thing I did at the beginning where I get the pose that I want to have because I've saved those keyframes from that pose, and then delete everything else. So now I've just got that first frame. If I drag and drop the action template right on top of there, it gives me a no entry sign. Oh yes, the reason it did was because I created the action template from the master peg, so I won't be able to drag it on the group layer. I've got to drag it onto the master peg layer because it's looking for that structure. So now if I try again, it's going to bring that in. So that's the way that we work with action templates and master templates in general. You need to first create the master, and then you can create the action template from the master. Now, one thing to be aware of is if you drag and drop the action template in on its own without dragging the master template first, you see how I get some weirdness with the nudging on those, and there are some layers that are out of place and in the wrong spot. Now, this is normal because when you're saving something from the right side of the timeline, it's not saving the detailed instructions on how to create that character. It's only saving keyframes and drawings. So when you save an action template, it doesn't know how exactly the structure is working to recreate that template. So you do need to start by dragging your master template in first and then dragging the action template on top of the master template when you're ready to reuse it. So that's the first type of action template. In this case, all I did was I was saving some keyframes to reuse. Now, what about if we want to save drawings to reuse drawings? This is another really good reason to create an action template. For example, if you want to do a blink, this is a really good reason to do this. So let's take a look at the eyes. Hopefully I have a couple of different eyes in there that I can use, and if not, then I'll just create them. No, it looks like I don't. So okay, so I'm just going to figure out where my eye layer is. I can select the eye, and then I can go down to my timeline and hit O or Shift O to get down to the eye layer, and I can find that eyeball in there. And remember, you can drawing swap using the bracket keys, but in this case I've only got one eyeball for each view. And so what I need, if I want to create a blink, is I need a second eyeball that's going to, you know, close the eyelid a little bit. So I can go to my drawing view, and then I'll just, you know, try to find where my eyeball is, and maybe I'll turn on my drawing grid to make sure I can figure it out. Sometimes if you get lost, turning on the drawing grid is a good idea, just to make sure that you know exactly where you are. So it looks like this eyeball has actually been split up into eyelid, pupil, and eyeball, and what I really wanted was the eyelid layer, and there are probably, yes, there are some blinks in the eyelid layer. So it looks like I'm okay. I don't need to create a new drawing. If you did need to create a new drawing, then you can just select a frame in your timeline there, and you can either duplicate the drawing, or you can create an empty drawing if you want to create a new drawing from scratch. And these buttons show up here when I have my Windows toolbars timeline view toolbar open. I usually like to leave that one open. So okay, let's go ahead and add the blink in here. So I've got that open eyeball, and by the way, you'll notice that they've labeled these in here in a smart way. Q stands for 3/4, so I know Q1 and I want to go to Q2, and then I'm going to go to Q3 for the closed eyelid. And then, you know, at some point maybe he's going to blink for a couple of frames, and then I want him to open his eyes again, so I will just go on until he's open again. So let's take a look at this in the timeline now. There we go, nice little blink. And I probably want to do the same thing on the other layer. So one thing that is nice, by the way, to know is that if you've named these like the same, if I go in my eyelid layer on the other eye and they're also named Q1, Q2, and Q3, if they're the same name, I should just be able to copy the exposure from here using Control-C and paste with Control-V, and it's actually going to paste the same exposure. This is something to understand, because when you copy and paste in the timeline down here, or when you're copying and pasting in the X sheet, which is just another way of representing these things, what it does is it doesn't copy the actual drawing. What it does is it copies the exposure. And the exposure is simply the label that tells you which drawing to use. So if you have the same labeling convention in multiple different layers, what it will do is it will use the drawing with that label on that layer. And that's why I'm able to copy and paste the exposure from one drawing layer to another, even though they're using different drawings. Like, even though this eyeball is sort of skinnier this way than this eyeball, it still works. So hopefully that was an okay concept to understand. But one thing now that we want to move to is this discussion of how can we now save this blink as a template that we can use to save that blink and reuse the blink. And it's probably a good idea now to collapse the two eye pegs in there, but you kind of have to know where the drawings are that you want to save your blink. So I'm just going to get my cursor on the correct frame there, and I know that I have to go forward until frame, you know, 33. So I can start at 28 here, and then I can collapse those two, and I can drag and drop from 28 to 33, which is about there. And now that I've got both of those selected, I can drag and drop this template now into my library, and I'm going to call this one Karate Rabbit Action Blink. Now, in this case, when you're saving your template, it saves both the drawings and the keyframes on it. And when you drag and drop it back in again, you might not want to use both the drawings and the keyframes. What I mean by this is, if we sort of zoom out a little and look at the animation on this guy, I've already got the animation done for the head. I've already got the keyframes set the way I want them to be. but I want to just add the blinks after as new drawings without changing the way that the keyframes are working. Because if I have keyframes on my eyes, if I drag and drop a normal drag and drop, it's going to overwrite those keyframes. It will overwrite whatever keyframes I had. Do you see how when I did that it added keyframes on my timeline? In this case it works because the keyframes aren't really doing anything, but I don't really want it to save those keyframes. And I can also notice when I do this that I didn't save my template all the way far enough because I didn't get the eyes all the way back open. But it's not the end of the world because I can go into my blink, I can edit the template, which is going to pop open the template as a separate window. Here we go. Sorry, I'm working on a MacBook Air here and it sometimes does get a little bit chuggy. Okay, so now if I go inside my blink template here, I can see I've got a few frames. I can just extend the exposure on those drawings there with F5 for another frame, and I can go ahead and go inside there and you'll see all the drawings in here. If you look at it, it's just like a smaller version of the other scene, and I can just swap to the open eye on those two frames. So that way I can get those in there. Now if you want to, directly in this template, you can hit F7 just to clear out the keyframes, which could be good, but I'll show you another trick also. So let's save this, and it warns me that it might not be usable as an action template, and what it means by that is if I made a change in the structure, it won't work anymore. So it's warning you to be careful that you didn't change the structure, and I didn't. All I did was I changed the exposure on the drawing. I didn't reorder anything. I didn't add any new layers, so I should be fine. And now I can close that. And if you're in doubt, then you can always save as so that you create a new template there. So when I drag and drop this in now, we'll just double check. It drags and drops it in without creating those keyframes, and it also has the full level of blink. Now if for some reason though you want to drag and drop it in, but you only want to drag and drop the drawings and not the keyframes, I want you to know that you can drag and drop your thing in, and as you're dragging, if you hold down, let's just figure out which key it is because sometimes I forget. If you hold down Control, then what the Control does is it brings up your drag special or your paste special window. And what this now does is if you go into your Advanced tab, what you can do is you can control whether you want it to do something with the drawings, whether you want it to do something with the keyframes, or whether you want it to do nothing. So if all I want it to do is adjust keyframes, then on drawings I'll put do nothing and I'll leave all the keyframes on. If I want it to just do drawings and not do keyframes, then I can uncheck all of those keyframe options and I can leave the drawing option on. One other thing to be aware of, by the way, is that by default it leaves it on only create drawing files when they do not exist. And what this means is if it looks in the drawing layer and it sees an exposure with the same name as the exposure in the template, it's going to reuse that exposure. If you turn on always create new drawings, then what it will do is it will, if it looks and it sees a Q1 in the template and it also sees a Q1 in the original source file, it will create a new name calling it Q1_1 or whatever, and this new name now is going to be a separate drawing and you'll be able to swap to that drawing separately in your library window. Most of the time you want to leave it on only create drawing files when they do not exist, but sometimes you're going to add drawings in, like if you're adding new hands, you might always want to create new drawings because you know that those hands don't exist in here. But sometimes as you're drawing, let's say you're an animator and you're working in a scene file and you're adding a whole bunch of hands in your drawing. When you add, it will call them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? By default it just gives them a number. And if you haven't named them something special, then another animator who's working on your team might be using the same rig and they might be creating their own hands, and their hands might also be labeled 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now if you want to combine both of those new hands into your master template, you want to make sure that it's going to give it a new name so that Otherwise, what it will do is it will only create the first 5 from the first person, and then it will see when you drag and drop the second person's work in there, it will see there's already 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it won't create it because it thinks you've already got those drawings in there. The other thing you can do is make sure that you have a good naming convention, but if you don't, and a lot of people don't, then you can use this option when you're adding new drawings into a master template. But most of the time we can leave this on here. So now that we've got this set, I can drag and drop this in, and now it's bringing in just the drawings without bringing the keyframes in. Now, one thing to be aware of, though, is when you adjust those drag special options using Control, it's going to save that information for the next time you do a drag. So if you ever get yourself into a situation where you're dragging a template in and it's not bringing something and you're expecting it to, then just double check your drag options to make sure that you didn't change something the last time you did it, because it will be reusing what you did the last time. So that's pretty much what I wanted to mention on this one. The only other thing I want to mention is that if you want to do things like add new drawings, like let's say I'm in my main scene now, let's add a new hand, right? So I've got my hand layer here. I can check out the drawing. I'll just make sure that I've got the drawing layer selected here, and I can duplicate the drawing to create a new drawing, and I'll just figure out where that is. And now I can add a new drawing in here, and I'll just do something really simple like adding a thumb, which I think I may have done the last time around also, but we'll get the trick across here. So let's say I've added a thumb now. I've added a new drawing with a thumb in it, and this is a brand new hand that I want to make available for all the artists. Then what I should do is I should first drag and drop just the drawing into my library, and I can label this something smart. You know, KR02 hand works pretty well. Maybe I just want to make sure that this is a uppercase so that it's the same as the other ones. Okay, so now that I've verified that I've named this hand template in a way that I can remember what it is, I'm ready to go ahead and add this back into my master template. Now, to add it into my master template, I want to right-click on that master template and do an Edit Template, which is going to pop open that template again as a separate sort of open scene window here. And once this opens up, what I'm going to do is I'll use that hand template just to drag and drop the drawing into here. And this is, remember, that case when you want to make sure that you're going to use always create drawing files. So if I take a look at my character layer, it doesn't really matter where in the timeline I add it, but just to make sure that I put it in kind of a place where it makes sense to me, then I'll stick it in here somewhere in the middle where that empty drawing is there. And so I just want to make sure that I find the hand layer, because when you add drawings in, you do have to add them in to the layer where they belong. So now if I go to my library, I can look for the hand template that I created earlier, and I can drag and drop it in. I'm going to hold down Control when I do so, though, and I'll go into the advanced options, and I'll just make sure that I always create drawing files, just so that, you know, when you're adding new drawings in, you really want to make sure they get added in, and that you don't miss them because there's already a drawing with that name. So, and then remember, when you're using that drag option, that it keeps that same setting for the next time you drag. So you want to make sure that you turn it back to only create files when they do not exist at some point, just so that you've got the right one. So now when I take a look at my master template, I have this new drawing available in my library as a drawing that I can use in this template. So I can save it, and it gives me that same warning about, you know, if you change the structure, then you can get yourself into trouble, but you know that you did the right thing, so you're okay. And now it won't change any scenes that already have the master template in them, because when you drag and drop that master template into a scene, it's creating an instance of that one. And I talked about that a little bit last time, but we do that as a protection. It's a good way of working, because lots of animators will be adding lots of drawings, and you don't want them changing the original master template. But now that I've added that drawing into the master template, any new scene files that are created from this point will all have those extra drawings in them. So what a lot of people do is, whenever they're working, as they're going through and they're making new drawings, they're going to keep adding those sequentially back into their master template. So let's say if you're working on a TV series or even just a short film or something, and you start out with 5 hands in your master template, at the end of it you might have 20 or you might have 30 that you've all done. And then that way, if you're going to reuse that character in another project, you've got a much larger base of drawings to work from. So that's just about everything to say on action templates. I showed you how we can save templates that have keyframes in them. I showed you how we can save drawings that have templates that have drawings, like the blink. And then I showed you how to create action templates that you can use just to copy drawings into your master template to fill out your master template as you go. So stay tuned next week for another tip of the week next week. Bye.